People sometimes do terrible things and think they can avoid the consequences, but they rarely do. The truth always catches up with them. My wife Kristen always had a perfect alibi and never gave me any reason to doubt her loyalty. Then one small detail slipped through, and it was enough to make everything fall into place. It's often the little things that reveal cracks in a marriage. The first red flag appeared one night when I noticed the hair on the back of her neck. I hadn't really paid attention to this area before, but when she climbed into bed, I instinctively reached out to hug her. My hand brushed against the moisture, and my mind instantly questioned it. Why is her neck wet? That evening, she had attended one of her monthly extended library board meetings. I had been waiting up for her, hoping we'd have a nice evening together. It had been a week since we'd last been intimate, and I was looking forward to closing that gap. I felt that wetness and realized something was wrong. Kristen was 28 and not what most people would call traditionally beautiful, but her figure made up for that. She was smart, funny, and I thought I could trust her completely. I loved her. She worked as an environmental biologist for the state, and I'm Bob, a 30-year-old civil engineer with a stable job at a consulting firm. We were doing well a year ago when we bought a cozy 3-bedroom house. We met through work and got engaged after 6 months. We were both in our early 30s and had been dating for a year. We had bought a bungalow in the suburbs. Kristen had stopped taking her birth control pills because we had decided it was time to start trying for a baby. Kristen was in her most fertile phase a year earlier when we moved into the house. She'd made friends with our neighbor, Samantha, who was divorced and around the same age. They spent a lot of time together, shopping or going to the movies. I didn't mind. I trusted my wife and had no reason to suspect anything was going on. Sam introduced Kristen to the local library board. At first, the meetings were short and infrequent, but a couple of months ago, they started happening more often, twice a month. A month later, each session lasted about 4 hours. Kristen said they were working on a new interactive computer system for the library. Since she was good with computers, the head librarian had asked for her help. After the meetings, it seemed like a valid reason, so I didn't think much of it at the time. But after one of those long meetings, I noticed Kristen seemed tense and distant. When I asked her about it, she said the head librarian was difficult to work with and needed special handling. I didn't want to pry, but her wet hair was bothering me. Why would the back of her neck be damp? Was she sweating? Had she taken a shower? I knew she didn't shower when she got home because I'd been awake waiting for her. When I leaned in closer, I smelled a soap that wasn't ours. Maybe she was at a motel. My suspicions began to spiral just as I was contemplating this. She rolled away from me, pulling the covers tighter around her. Not tonight, she said. She said, sounding exhausted, that the meeting ran long. I'm tired, and we both have work tomorrow. I tried to stay calm. All right, honey, get some rest. But I had a bad feeling. We had talked about starting a family. We had even planned it. Her avoidance of intimacy after those board meetings wasn't new. This pattern only fueled my growing doubts. She had always used fatigue as an excuse. But now I wondered if there was something she didn't want me to discover. Why would she cheat on me? That was the question. The question that wouldn't go away was this: we'd been married for 5 years and, while we'd put off having kids for financial reasons, now felt like the right time. I'd just been promoted and Kristen had stopped taking the pill a week earlier, so it all made sense. But there was still this nagging doubt that kept creeping in. What if things fell apart? What if she ended up pregnant by someone else? Would I be stuck paying child support? I spent the rest of the night lying awake, wondering how to handle this. Should I confront her? I needed more proof before I accused her. If I approached her with just suspicions, she'd deny everything and I'd look paranoid. I also needed to protect myself. I decided to delay intimacy at least for a while. If she was pregnant by someone else, she might try to have sex with me soon to cover it up. A plan started forming in my mind. If she had been with someone else that night, she would probably try to initiate. I needed to get out of town for a bit by myself. A business trip seemed like the perfect excuse, and since my trips usually lasted a week, it would fit neatly into any plan she might have. I just needed to figure out who this other man was, how long the affair had been going on, where they met, and if these meetings coincided with her library board nights. It was likely he was someone involved with the board. I quietly slipped out of bed, headed downstairs, and I found her purse inside and started looking through her things. Her credit cards were all there, but then I found one with her maiden name, Kristen Lawrence, from a bank we weren't even associated with. Why did she still have it? I looked further and found a business card tucked away. It belonged to William Wilde, the head librarian. He was a man she had never mentioned. I was really angry. I grabbed her phone and scrolled through her call logs. William's number appeared frequently. There were no text messages, which made sense. It seems they were in touch by phone as well. I put her phone back and moved onto our computer. I found an encrypted email folder but was able to bypass her security settings inside. I uncovered dozens of messages between her and William going back to when she started attending those late board meetings. They had been meeting at the Red Roof, near the interstate. Their emails were explicit, describing things she had never done with me. In one of those emails, they both mocked me and his wife, despite claiming they loved us. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I copied all the emails to a separate folder and prepared to print them later. I went back upstairs to the spare room, grabbed my suitcase and began packing for an impromptu business trip by 5:30 a.m. I was ready to go. I entered the bedroom where Kristen was just waking up. "Why are you up so early?" she asked, yawning. "Why are you dressed?" "I have a flight to catch," I told her. Her work called last night. They need me to check on some projects. "I'll grab breakfast at the airport." She stared at me, trying to process my sudden departure. "How do I reach you if I need to?" "Just call me," I said, kissing her on the cheek before hurrying downstairs with my bags. I headed for the door, but heard her voice behind me. "Hey, Bob. What about starting a family? We were supposed to talk about that this weekend. We'll have to push it to next month. I'll give you a call when I get to my first stop." I opened the garage door and got into my car. I heard her crying from behind, but by the time she could say anything else, I was already driving down the street. I made sure my phone was off and then hit the interstate, heading away from everything. 2 hours later, I pulled into my dad's retirement place, nestled by a quiet lake out in the countryside. He wasn't expecting me, but as soon as I walked in, he started. He was making breakfast as usual, so we had coffee while I told him about Kristen. My dad, who'd lost his wife, was really upset. He'd always wanted a daughter, and he saw Kristen as his daughter. "I don't understand why she did that." "Son, I know your mother and dad had a strong relationship. As far as I know, she never strayed. You need to tread carefully here. Don't rush anything." He was looking really worried. "I know, Dad. I'll go back tomorrow to meet her. I need to find out what my legal options are," I replied. Dad nodded in approval. "Tim's a solid guy. We've trusted him for years." I smiled, grateful for his support. "Your coffee is still top-notch, Dad, and the omelets are unbeatable." He laughed. "Well, if you end up cooking for yourself more often, you might even catch up to my level one day," I noted. I chuckled, though the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on my shoulders at 9 o'clock. I called my office to check in with my boss. We agreed that if Kristen called looking for me, they'd tell her I was on the road and that she could reach me on my cell. He even had the receptionist prepped with the same story. I also requested a week off, which he approved without hesitation. Afterward, I glanced at my phone for missed calls from Kristen. Each one was more urgent than the last. She wanted me to call her back immediately, but I made her wait until noon. When I finally called, she sounded tense. "Where are you, honey? Can I come fly out to spend the weekend with you? I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'll be heading out tomorrow, and I'm not sure where I'll be staying for a bit. Let's plan something for next month. Got to run. The guys need me. She hesitated. I love you. I didn't respond to that. I just hung up, letting the silence linger. My dad overheard the exchange and shook his head, saying nothing. I arranged to meet Tim Gordon afterwards. I drove back to town, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. Tim greeted me with his usual warm demeanor. Good to see you, Bob. What's going on? He said it would require solid proof, which would be costly to gather and hard to prove in court since we didn't have kids and Kristen had a good job. He said the divorce would likely be a straightforward 50-50 split. I asked about the possibility of her being pregnant by the other man, and Tim reassured me I wouldn't be on the hook for child support. I felt a little lighter after our conversation. I thanked him and promised to get back to him with my final decision soon. I hadn't finished for the day, though. I still had more work to do. I made my way to the library, wandering around until I found the door marked Head Librarian. I grabbed a random magazine and sat nearby, keeping my eye on the door. After about 30 minutes, a man around my age stepped out. He looked so plain, so average. I wondered what Kristen saw in him that was worth risking everything we had. I left the library, headed to an electronics store, and picked up a voice-activated recorder. Then I checked into the Red Roof where Kristen and William had met. I got a room for the night and, with some time to kill, I went back home. I needed to check our computer. Their recent emails hinted at her fears about a possible pregnancy. She hadn't been with me recently, so they were worried William might end up being the father. I took some satisfaction in seeing their panic and copied the messages to my own files. Later, back in the motel room, I tried to relax. I watched TV, but my thoughts kept drifting back to why she had done this. We had a decent life together. We were planning for a future, kids, retirement, all of it. Our relationship wasn't as electric as it had been in the early years, but it was still solid. Her reaction to my sudden business trip made me wonder, was she pregnant with William's child? Had she already made up her mind to choose him over me? Maybe there was a side to her I hadn't seen before. A side like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. H. As I thought about the past 5 years, I felt a deep sense of loss. Those years now seemed wasted, tainted by her betrayal. Even if she hadn't gotten pregnant, I knew I couldn't forgive her. Divorce was inevitable, but first I had to confront her, and that wasn't something I looked forward to. Around 2 a.m., I called home. She picked up. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. Are you okay? I just want you to come home. I'll try to get back soon. Maybe talk to Sam. She can cheer you up. I had a feeling Sam knew more about Kristen's affair than she let on. I didn't care. I love you, honey. I'll see you soon. That night, I went to the motel office. I was relieved to see I gave the young man at the desk $100 to look into the motel's records. I gave him Kristen's maiden name and the approximate dates of their meetings. He said he'd check the logs and have a list for me by the morning. I went straight to the office, and sure enough, he had the list. He had the list, as I'd expected. It turned out that Kristen and William had been meeting up after her library board meetings. When I showed the young man at the motel a picture of my wife, he seemed to recognize her. He confirmed she had checked in using her credit card and that he remembered her because she was discreet yet consistent in her visits. He said that they only stayed for about an hour each time before leaving in separate cars. He noted that this was pretty common among the many unfaithful spouses he'd seen come through the place. After a quick breakfast, I drove back to my dad's house. The rest of the week passed in a blur of fishing trips and quiet conversations. On Thursday, I called Tim Gordon and told him to start the divorce proceedings. He assured me that he'd have the paperwork ready within a few days. I spent each night calling Kristen, keeping up the pretense that I was in different cities. She believed I was on a business trip, but she sounded more and more distraught. With each call, I felt a twinge of pity, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. Revenge was brewing inside me, though it felt bittersweet. I got back home Friday afternoon, while she was still at work. From their emails, it seemed like her affair was losing steam. Fear of a potential pregnancy had driven a wedge between them. I realized I wouldn't need the recording device anymore and could return it for a refund. I already had more than enough. I had proof of her betrayal. I sat down and printed out 2 copies of their email exchanges. William's wife deserved to see what had been happening behind her back. The only thing I hadn't decided yet was when to confront Kristen. Should I do it right away or wait until she confirmed she was pregnant? When she returned from work that evening, she practically threw herself at me, hugging me tightly and crying. "Darling, I've missed you so much," she sobbed. I tried to keep things light. "What's going on, darling? Did the sink clog up again?" She shook her head no. "I just realized how much I love you and how much I've missed you. After dinner, I want to finally make that plan we've been talking about happen. If that's what you want, maybe I should leave more often," I said with a hint of sarcasm. "No, don't ever leave me again. We'll head upstairs for some quality time," I said, forcing a smile. She smiled through her tears, relieved. "That sounds perfect." I felt like such an idiot after dinner at a nearby restaurant. We rushed home. She was practically sprinting up the stairs to our bedroom, eager to make things right. By the time I joined her, she was already lying on the bed, looking up at me with anticipation. "Hurry up, dear. I'm ready," she said breathlessly. I took my time folding my clothes, unable to shake the thought. I thought about what I was going to say next. I was sure she was ready. I looked at her and realized there was a part of me that would miss her, but I knew I wasn't going to let anyone else have her. She had been mine, and I'd always believed she still was until now. Time was running out and soon she wouldn't legally be mine anymore. I kissed her lightly on the lips, trying to mask my true feelings. Then she took control, mirroring the things she had. As it turned out, she was trying to win me back in her emails with William. I decided to do something a bit cruel, but it seemed fitting at the time. I let things build up, bringing her to the edge, and then stopped just seconds before the end. I pulled away. "What are you doing?" she gasped, clearly confused. "What's wrong?" I sat on the edge of the bed, finally ready to say what I'd been holding back. I needed to talk. "The reason I stopped is simple. I can't get the image of you with William out of my head." Her breath hitched, and when I turned to look at her, her face was a mask of horror. "It's over," I said quietly. "I'm filing for divorce." She shot up from the bed and ran to the bathroom, where I heard her vomiting. The sound echoed through the house. When she finally stopped, I peeked into the bathroom. She was slumped on the floor. Kristen was sobbing her head off, so I didn't bother trying to comfort her. Instead, I went to the guest bathroom, took a shower, and changed into clean clothes. Then I headed downstairs, poured myself a stiff drink, and waited for her to join me. I knew she'd come down eventually, probably hoping to salvage whatever she could from the wreckage of our marriage. She might even try to convince me not to go through with the divorce, but I knew better. There was nothing left to save. The room was dimly lit. I was sitting in the living room, drinking a glass of wine, and looking out at the kitchen. I was thinking about what the future held for me. I was young, with plenty of time to start a family and climb the career ladder. Despite that, I felt a sense of emptiness. The sobbing had stopped upstairs, which meant she was moving from shock to denial. It wouldn't be long before she came down. Sure enough, after some time, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She came into the living room. Wrapped in a bathrobe and sitting across from me, her face tear-streaked and weary, I reached over and flipped on a light. "Are you ready to talk now?" I asked. My voice was calm, but there was a note of urgency in my question. "Cal, are you ready to tell me why you did this?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know why I did it, Bob. I swear, after the first time, I told myself I'd never do it again. It started so innocently, just having drinks after meetings. But you know how I get. After a few drinks, it seemed so tempting and exciting. It got easier every time she looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I think hearing Sam talk about cheating on her ex-husband made me curious. I should have known better, but I didn't stop. I don't know why I didn't stop. Why did you do it the first time I asked? My voice was tight with frustration. Was there something in our conversations about loyalty and trust before we got married that you didn't understand? Or maybe it was something in the vows we made. The ones where we promised to forsake all others. Was that unclear? If you didn't agree with those commitments, why didn't you tell me back then? I sigh, feeling the weight of the last 5 years pressing down on me. I've given you 5 years of my life, Kristen. Now I'm the one who has to start over, searching for someone who actually understands the importance of fidelity in a marriage. She was trembling now. Tears in her eyes. Bobby, let's work this out. I love you. I don't want to lose you. I still want to have children with you. I shook my head, trying to stay calm. Let's get one thing straight. I said, you lost the right to call me honey or any of those other tender names the moment you crawled into bed with him. Do you understand? I was starting to lose my patience, but I forced myself to remain calm. I wasn't going to let anger get the better of me. Speaking of children, I continued, when exactly do you plan on finding out if you're pregnant? It was the second time that night her face turned pale. She stared at me in shock as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, Kristen, I know, I replied, my voice sharp. You want to know why I faked that? I was on a business trip to make you feel some of the pain I've been feeling. That's why I'm pushing for a divorce. You went out of your way to try and conceive a child with your lover. You hoped I'd sleep with you afterwards to cover up his tracks. You wanted me to raise his child. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. That's not going to happen. Kristen, what you did is one of the worst things a wife can do to her husband. You showed total disrespect for me and our marriage. There's no going back from that. Even if you hadn't gone, I might have been able to forgive you, but you didn't stop. You kept going over and over again, and that's something I'll never be able to forgive. Therapy won't fix this. Nothing will. Pausing, she gave him one last chance to explain himself. Do you have anything to say for yourself? She asked. He shook his head, tears rolling down his cheeks. I'm sorry, Bob, she whispered. That's settled then. I've already spoken to Tim Gordon and the divorce papers will be ready by Monday. We'll split everything 50-50 and there won't be any alimony, even if you were pregnant. I won't be paying child support because it's not my child. Are you okay with that arrangement? Her voice was shaky, but she nodded. It seems fair. I'll talk to a lawyer before I agree, but it seems fair. I'll sleep in the spare room until we're officially separated. In the meantime, I'll look for an apartment. You can stay here and entertain your lovers. Once I'm gone, it's over with William. She muttered, her eyes downcast. I gathered that from the emails. I replied, not hiding the bitterness in my voice. It's a shame you didn't end it sooner. I've got copies of the emails and the dates and times of your meetings at the Red Roof Inn. I'm taking them to William's wife tomorrow. She deserves to know what's been going on behind her back. You met him there 13 times. You used a credit card under your maiden name, probably just in case. That makes me wonder how many other affairs you had before William. Her face fell as I continued. His wife needs to know the truth. You need to know the truth. If you're pregnant, William might be the one who has to pay child support. That's between you two. Do you have to bring him into this? She pleaded, her voice breaking. He has kids, Bob. I don't think having children should let him off the hook for what he did. I might still consider filing an alienation of affection lawsuit against him. Please don't do that. She begged, sounding more desperate now. We'll see, I said, curtly. Lai was quiet for a moment, gathering herself. Then she finally said, her voice a little steadier. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to your parents and your brother. They deserve to know the truth. I don't want you telling them some story that makes me out to be the villain. And if you're pregnant, I'll make sure your colleagues and friends know what you've done to me. Her tears returned, streaming down her face. I stood up, not bothering to offer her any comfort. I had nothing left to say to offer her comfort. I walked upstairs, leaving her alone with her guilt, and went to bed in the spare room. The next morning, I left early, slipping out of the house before Kristen woke up. I took the emails and motel records with me, knowing she'd been crying all night and was probably exhausted by now. Breakfast at IHOP felt like the first step in what would become my new routine. I figured it was time to start getting used to it. I thought about the day ahead as I drank my coffee. By 7:30, I was ready to go to Kristen's parents' house. I knew they were early risers, so I knocked on their kitchen door. I saw them sitting at the table, having breakfast. Kristen's father waved me in and recognized me immediately. I went in and sat down. Kristen's mother poured me a cup of coffee. "Bob, what brings you here so early? Do you want some breakfast?" her father asked. "No," I said. "Thank you, but I've already eaten at IHOP." "There's something important I need to talk to you about," I said, but her mother frowned. "What's wrong?" "I'm divorcing Kristen," I said, watching as her mother's hand slipped. The coffee cup crashed to the floor, and the sound echoed in the room as her face went pale with shock. "Divorce Kristen," her mother gasped, her voice filled with disbelief. "This can't be real. You two were planning to." "I'm afraid it's true. She's been having an affair for the past few months, and there's a chance she's pregnant by the man she's been seeing." All angles. "Are you sure? How did this happen? Where is Kristen? Can't you two work it out? Who is the other man?" I did my best to answer their questions. "Yes, I'm certain," I said. "I have emails and motel records to prove it. The baby is mine. That's something I can't forgive." "Who's the other man?" her father asked. I answered that he's married, and from what I've heard, he has children of his own. Kristen's mother shot up from her seat, rushing toward the phone. "I need to speak to her. I can't believe my daughter would do something like this." "You should call her," I said, standing to leave. "She needs your support, but don't sugarcoat it. She needs to face the consequences of what she's done. She's broken 2 families, not just ours." I could hear her mother dialing the phone as I headed toward the door. Kristen's father took my hand. His eyes were filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Bob. I don't know what to say." I squeezed his hand gently, feeling a pang of sadness. I genuinely liked her family, and I hated that they were caught in the middle of this. It was a mess, but there was no way to soften the blow. I left their house feeling heavy-hearted, knowing the pain this was going to cause everyone involved. Next, I drove to William Wild's house, parking on the street in front of their modest bungalow. I approached the door with the packet of evidence in hand and rang the bell. William himself answered, his face streaked with tears. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I need to speak with your wife and give her something," I replied, my voice cold. She wasn't available, so he said I could give whatever I had to give to him and he'd make sure she got it. I said I knew who he was and why he was there. "William," I said, stepping forward, "there's no way you can stop me from speaking to your wife. I suggest you let her come to the door, or I'll take legal action against you for alienation of affection." William hesitated for a moment, then he sighed and called out, "Maggie, someone's here to see you." He turned back to me, glaring. "You bastard," he said. "No. William, you're the one who broke your vows and shattered my marriage. Now I intend to do the same to yours. I'm filing for divorce because my wife has been having an affair with my husband for several months. I have evidence of their relationship." I handed her the packet. "These are copies of emails they exchanged along with records of their meetings at the motel." As I spoke, I watched her face change. The shock was evident on her features as the reality of my words hit her. "Is this true?" "You can ask your husband," I replied. "He's standing right here." She turned to William, and he broke down immediately. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry, Maggie." Her face turned ashen, and she looked back at me, the pain in her eyes evident. "I'm sorry too, Mrs. Wilde," I said quietly. "I wish we hadn't ended up with such disappointing spouses. I also feel for you and your children. You should know that my wife might be pregnant with your husband's child." I handed her the packet and gave her a nod. "Do what you need to with the information. I'm truly sorry for what you're going through with that." I left unable to bear the sight of her heartbreak any longer. I wanted to protect her from the pain, but there was nothing I could do to soften the blow when I got back home. The house was empty. Kristen wasn't there. I didn't care where she had gone. Once upon a time, I would have worried about her safety or felt incomplete without her, but now all I felt was indifference. I went out to mow the lawn in old clothes, needing something to take my mind off everything. In the end, Kristen, despite her family's objections, decided to terminate the pregnancy. This drove a wedge between her and her family, and they've been distant ever since my divorce was finalized. I set the terms: no alimony and an equal division of assets. Now I'm single, and while I'm looking for a new partner, I'm facing some trust issues. I've started therapy and read up on psychological ethics to try to understand what went wrong and how to move forward. I'm not sure if any of it will help, but I'm hoping it will guide me as I search for someone new. 2 years after the divorce, I had another chance to get back at Kristen. I found out that she was engaged again after speaking with her fiancé. I shared the details of our marriage, and not long after, he called off the engagement. I felt like it was a small victory. I've even started watching to see if she tries to get engaged again. As for William and Maggie, they're still together. I hear that she keeps a tight rein on him. Having children was enough to keep them from splitting up in some ways. I'm glad I found out about Kristen's betrayal before we started a family of our own. Thanks for watching this emotional story of love, lust, and lies. I hope it touched your heart. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a fresh story every day. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, so feel free to share your experiences and tell your story.